The two biggest things are a system that doesn't align with your processes and then over-engineering the system. So if you're finding that you're constantly having to adjust the way that you do business in order to make it fit within your technology, that's not the right technology. The technology should bend to the way that you do your business and not the other way around. You shouldn't change a core process on how you function because the technology won't do what you need it to. That's where I see it flop every time and time, because your process is the process for a reason, right? It's proven, it's repeatable, it works. Don't just change it because the technology can't keep up. And then that's where it comes into the over engineering. Well, we know our process so well. Let's build all of this and we overcomplicate systems and we make them way more technically complicated than they need to because we're trying to solve everything.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Kristen McGarr from Adroit Insights, thanks so much for joining me today. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Kristen, I wanted to dive straight in. There's one thing that really stood out to me when I was sort of introduced to you, and our philosophy is very similar, and we have a shared view of the sort of priorities for companies or their leaders when they're implementing a CRM. I mean, we talk about this every single week, and then when I was reading some of the stuff that you talk about, I was like, oh my gosh, we're like speaking the same language, which is your philosophy, which is the same as ours, is people, process, technology, right? Ours is people, process, data, and technology. So that's a question maybe for later, but explain to our listeners why, because I know and you know that when our clients come to us, what they're really looking for is a CRM, right? But we know, and they often don't, is that, well, yes, sure, that's going to be the end result, but we have to do a few things first, which is, do you have the people and process pieces figured out? Because otherwise, what's the technology going to do for you? How do you think about it, and why do you have that philosophy?
Yeah. So, the biggest thing that I see is when people look at technology, they hear, oh, this is the newest technology that's there for my industry, or this is the tech that I should go and use. But so many of us say, well, my business is unique because. So those are contradicting statements, right? Don't just grab something that's industry specific if you're so unique. And so we look at what's the tool that really fits best with you. Well, the only way we know what fits best is who are your people and what are your processes. And by looking at it from that perspective, we are able to get better user adoption. When we sit down and meet with teams to be able to determine, first off, what CRM makes sense for them to go in, and then what features do we really want to focus on within the CRM, it's finding out who's on the team. What are they used to? Do they really just still have Post-it notes on their desk, even though they are using the CRM? Do they have 27 different spreadsheets because they're very analytical and they want to manipulate the data and see it in all different ways? Where are they coming from? What's their history? What's their experience like? And what matters to them? And once we understand that, we start to find even just one key little feature that each person wants in the system, and we make sure we put it in there so that when we go and launch, we say, hey, Brendon, remember that one piece that you had talked about? Look, this is right here. Well, now you have ownership in this CRM because we built something specifically to meet your needs. And that really helps that adoption process. And a lot of organizations don't have process consistency, right? So everybody's doing everything their own little way, especially as you bring in new salespeople, new team members, then a new manager comes in and has their methodology. And so to find a uniform process, something that's going to work for everyone and really help grow the organization, you can build all of that into your CRM and it helps guide them. It walks them through. It removes the need for micromanaging and it lets the system really support the organization as a whole.
Right. Yeah. I like that. And of course, like I said, we kind of see it in a very similar way. So one of the things that you alluded to there was adoption, right? Which is, if you think, you know this and I know this, but for the folks listening who are maybe considering implementing a CRM or have recently implemented a CRM and it's not going so well, I think one of the things that's not made clear to them from the very beginning is that the number one metric for success of a CRM is adoption, right? Because if it's not being adopted by your team, then what's the point of having a CRM?
Exactly.
Right? Because you're not going to have any useful data in there to use to make better, faster decisions, no matter where you sit in the organization. So there's a very strong link between why we think about people, process before technology, because an adoption is a big part of that. Because the people have to understand why they need to adopt it and how their day-to-day processes are actually going to be better once they have adopted the CRM. How else do you think about and explain adoption to your clients?
Well, I think you really nailed it. It's the why, right? Why are we doing this? This is not just some new administrative task that has to be done because leadership wants to see some data, right? If that's the why, it's not going to succeed in the organization. If your whole goal is, hey, I need to see these reports so I can micromanage you and track you better, no salesperson's going to comply. They're just going to be resistant to it. And they're going to find ways to convince you that the technology is the problem when it's really not, right? It's this resistance that's built into it. So really helping them to understand, here is the value that you're going to get. Hey, you know that really annoying task that you wish you had a virtual admin to help support you with? Well, guess what? Your CRM is that virtual admin. We're going to take those annoying tasks, those just administrative things that generally salespeople don't like to do. They think that CRM is an administrative burden, but actually it can be a huge administrative relief point if put together properly. Most CRMs off the shelf are administrative hassles. A CRM that has the right configuration becomes an administrative asset.
Right. Yeah. Which, of course, is something else that I know we both deal with. And I guess maybe for the folks listening, so we at Dynamica, we're very heavily focused on HubSpot as our core platform. But I really like the approach that you've taken is, so even though you build a lot on Zoho, you have this sort of approach where the technology doesn't really matter as much as why we're doing what we're doing. Why is our business implementing a CRM in the first place? The technology ultimately is very important, but it shouldn't be the deciding factor, which unfortunately, because CRM companies are really, really good at marketing and sales, that's often why people buy the technology before they actually know why they're buying it and what they're going to do with it. So with that aside, so the technology, again, so you might lean more into some technologies and we might lean into other technologies for various reasons. I think a lot of it is business size, business complexity, where one software, and I think this is why I like your approach, is you might have many of your clients who are perfect fit for Zoho, but when you know that because of their complexity, HubSpot might be a better fit, then that's what you would advise them to do, right?
Exactly.
Which I think is another good way to sort of to explain more about what we're talking about, is that the technology ultimately has to be implemented, but you don't start there. You start with the why and the what and the how before you even get to really playing with the tool, as it were, or the shiny object, which of course is really part of the issue. You've worked with a lot of small business, and I know you really love to help sort of solopreneurs and small franchise businesses, et cetera. On the tech side, how do you think about when one technology becomes a better option than another?
So I'll go through an evaluation process with a client, and there are some key things that organizations can look at when they're trying to decide what's the right CRM. The key components that really set most CRMs apart are things like integrations, right? What software are you currently using that you want to integrate with your CRM? Sometimes it doesn't need to integrate, right? But other times there's a huge value add to it. So which ones have a native integration or integrate well with what you're looking to do? That's a big deciding factor there. Another one is automations, right? A lot of people will automate very, very heavily right in the beginning, and it makes everyone freak out and not want to touch the CRM because if I click this button, I don't know what 7 actions are going to happen, right? We got to be careful with that. So, but you do want it to have the ability to grow with you. So what automation capabilities exist that are going to make sense for your organization? And then the other piece that comes into play is the analytics, right? As much as we don't want to build a system purely to get data and reporting out of it, we want that to be easy. We want you to be able to have this easy to digest, easy to understand data. Reporting for reporting's sake is a terrible idea. But if you can look at a dashboard of reports and it tells a story that you can now go and take actions on, and it gives you those insights, like that's where the huge value comes from. And it goes back to the people. If I've got people who are very, very stubborn and not wanting to leave a spreadsheet, we have to take that into account. I had one organization, they could not grow past 6 people. They were really just stunted there. And they had one person who was amazing, but she was at the crux of it all. And she used a spreadsheet. And everyone else played in her spreadsheet, but it was very challenging for them. And we got them to move over into a CRM, but she really wanted to keep within her spreadsheet. So what we did was we made it a Google Sheet. We integrated it with the CRM. All of the salespeople were able to work within the CRM, and she could continue working in her spreadsheet, but the data was shared fluidly back and forth. So everybody got what they needed. And that organization within 6 months grew from 6 to 21 reps that they had working, because that was just this one pain point that they needed to overcome. So it doesn't always mean, hey, we've got to throw out everything you have, right? That's why I work with any system that's out there. It just may be that you're underutilizing. As much as I do love Zoho as a tool, I had one client come to me and say, I want to leave Zoho. It's terrible. We don't like it. It's like, okay, great. Let's talk through what you need. Turns out they just didn't have half the features turned on and they weren't using them. Once we did it, they've been in there 4 years later. They're still absolutely loving it, and they refer people to Zoho. So it's just, sometimes it's not the right tool for people, but sometimes it's just the tool. Just not using it enough. I call it the 0.5, right? The other half. People are not using the other half of their CRM most of the time. And we've got to get them to really harness and pull out those other elements to get the value from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Kristen, you and I have both learned this the hard way, as most business owners do. So you didn't just go in day one and figure that this is how we're going to do it. You learned this through the sort of the hard knocks, et cetera. And some of those are failed CRM implementations, right? And so what are some of the most common reasons that you see for the implementation of CRMs failing? And because I'm guessing now with this process that you have and this philosophy that you have, it probably doesn't happen anymore, or it happens, it's very seldom, but it's still happening in other cases where people don't have someone like you to guide them through the process. What do you think are the biggest reasons that CRM implementations fail?
Yeah. So I think the two biggest things are a system that doesn't align with your processes, and then over engineering the system. So if you're finding that you're constantly having to adjust the way that you do business in order to make it fit within your technology, that's not the right technology. The technology should bend to the way that you do your business and not the other way around. You shouldn't change a core process on how you function because the technology won't do what you need it to. That's where I see it flop every time and time, because your process is the process for a reason, right? It's proven, it's repeatable, it works. Don't just change it because the technology can't keep up. And then that's where it comes into the over engineering. Well, we know our process so well. Let's build all of this, and we overcomplicate systems and we make them way more technically complicated than they need to because we're trying to solve everything. And I help people remember the 10%, and I bring it up all the time. Is this applying to 90%, or is this the 10%? Is this a one-off case? Because a lot of these over-engineered systems are only focused on that 10%. They're not focused on the big picture, on what happens the majority of the time. It's like, well, we have this exception. Those exceptions to the rule are not what you should be designing your system for. We can put in other smaller elements to help support that, but the system's core design should not be based on the exception. They should be based on the rule. And that's the biggest piece where I've seen people really, really struggle. And so just, if I could tell anything to the organizations out there thinking about a CRM, just think, is this the 10%? Because if it is, don't try to build your system for that.
Right. Because of course, what happens if you do, it just becomes, when I know you talk about this a lot too, where when you're adding, like in the example you gave earlier, when that organization went from 6 people to 21, when you're adding people, the more complicated the system is for them to use, the less likely it is they're going to use it successfully, or the longer it's going to take them to use it successfully. So just keep it simple and let it do, whether it's the 90% or the 80%. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as we're talking about growth of a business, whether a business is going from 6 to 21 or 20 to 50 or whatever the numbers are, one of the other things that we see, I'd be interested to get your view on this, is a lot of business leaders seem to be caught blindsided by the fact that adding people is going to add complications. It's going to potentially change the processes over time. And of course, the technology is probably changing at the same time as well. How do you suggest or help your clients address growth of people? Because it seems to be something that they don't really think about when they're implementing a CRM. They think the CRM is going to take care of all this growth as it happens sort of organically, which of course doesn't happen. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm always looking at, we talk about 5-year, 10-year plans and visions when we think about your system. So think about where you expect to be 5 years and 10 years from now. Now, the technology will be completely different 10 years from now. I mean, if you asked me 6 years ago what the right CRM tools were, I was going to give you a different list than I'd give you today. So you don't necessarily need to plan your tech 10 years in the future, but you want to think about your business from that perspective. And where are you going to be 3 years from now? What do you want that to look like? And when you're building your system, yes, you need to build for today. You need to make it the right tool for today, but you need to make sure that that technology can grow with you. It has the flexibility. If you find that there's a system that, well, it's great right now, but it really gets cost prohibitive once we hit 15 people. Well, we want to be at 15 people in 2 years. Well, okay. Is it cost prohibitive because of how much money you're making now? If you're growing to 15 people, maybe you have enough and it's not cost prohibitive. Or maybe the system gets more expensive before you can afford to pay for it, right? And we look at things like that. But again, it's remembering that if you've got a good, solid process in place and the core root of it, adding more people shouldn't shift your process that dramatically. Now, there will be changes, right? You're going to bring in new innovators and new ideas are going to come through, and you need to have the flexibility to do that. So it's just constantly asking yourself the right questions, finding someone to work with like you or like me that knows how to ask those questions, knows how to ask those forward-thinking questions. We know limitations on what the systems and the technology can do now, but you and I have both been around this industry for a while and we've seen the changes, and we can not fully predict, but have a rough idea of what the future is going to look like for this technology. And because of that, we can start to assess and plan and make the decisions for people on where they're going to run into a limiting factor. Maybe you get a system that is perfect when it comes to your CRM and you don't do any marketing right now. So you're thinking, well, I don't need a HubSpot because I don't. Well, are you planning on doing marketing? You're looking to grow. What's that going to look like? Well, yeah, actually, we're probably going to hire a firm and have them help us with a lot of our content creation. HubSpot's perfect then, right? If in 6 months you're going to bring on a team and you're really ramping up your marketing, you should be looking at HubSpot as a tool. It's very robust in that regard, and it's a great way to go. So, but sometimes people just think so much in the moment. I've got to make this technology decision for today. I don't want to build for 3 years from now if it's not going to work for today. And the great news is it can do both. It can work today and be good for future years. We just have to think about both.
Yeah, if you make the right choice. Yeah, very, really good. You mentioned something else there, Kristen, around like cost and expense, which seems to be another area where a lot of business leaders get stuck on, because again, they might be doing this for the first time, or they really don't understand what the real cost is, or we prefer to think of it as an investment, what the investment is in having their technology do the things to support their long-term business objectives, right? It seems a lot of business owners still get stuck. They think the cost of a CRM is their software subscription, right? Whether it's a HubSpot or Zoho, or you name the CRM software, that is the cost. How do you explain to them in those early days when they're trying to make a decision, well, there are other costs to having a successful CRM? How do you position that with them?
One of the first things that I do when I'm talking to somebody about bringing on a CRM system, or even just utilizing their existing one better, is who is your internal champion in the company? Who do you have? And if you don't have a person identified, that's somebody to think about. A lot of times organizations will hire and bring on a sales admin, somebody that can then support obviously other sales functions, but then be that champion for the CRM system. That right there gets them start thinking about additional expenses that may come in play. Now, maybe you don't want to hire someone internally, but you're still going to need some level of support for the systems, right? You should not be having your marketing person or your BD person taking away from their days to figure out how to automate a tool when you can pay somebody who's got an expertise in it 30 minutes to go ahead and do it, right? And so it's really just thinking about what are those future needs that you might have, understanding that every CRM implementation should be considered as a phased approach. And it's not 3 phases. It is an infinite number of phases, because as your business changes and grows, you're going to add on a new phase. You're going to do some more. You're going to want to add to this. And some of these phases are really small and some are larger than others. but what does that growth look like? Where do we want to change? Where do we want to add on new perspectives? So finding the right partner that they can get support from, even using some great tools out there like Upwork to be able to find a resource when you just need something from time to time to be done. There's just so many ways that organizations can help support themselves through this. We always provide a video library to all of our clients. As you work with your clients, you're providing them guidance and direction and things like that. And I think that's so valuable, right? To be able to help them be their own best CRM developer, right? To give them these little 30, 60-second clips that say, hey, if you want to call me to add another option to your drop-down field, I'm happy to do it, but you don't need me for that. Here's 20-second video that shows you exactly how to do it. And by the way, it's only 20 seconds long because that's all the time it's going to take you. And empowering them, right? This is your system. Own it, love it, make it what you need, and don't feel like you're at the mercy of your support teams and other people in order to make it what you want. Ask the questions of your CRM providers, right? Like if you're working, a lot of organizations work directly with the technology company. They don't work with implementers like us. And if you do, make sure to ask them all the questions. What kind of support does that CRM company offer? Some of them have fantastic support, and others bring on partners like us because they don't have great support. And that's something really important for them to know and understand, because it really does impact the long-term costs.
Right, right. Or I guess the support that they offer is really to support the technology, not to support the business processes, right? Coming back to where we started with, they can support any technical issues around the technology, but it's very unlikely that they'll be able to guide you on improving your processes or making sure that you're training the current people or the future people, as they're added to the team.
Yeah, you make such a great point there, because you need that business process mindset. A technologist building the technology, you say, when I click here, I want this to update. Great. We can actually do that, right? When you click here, this updates. Well, they didn't think about the fact that 4 other elements of your CRM are affected by that. You didn't ask them to. You simply asked them, when I click here, do this. So having that business mindset, having that mentality with process first, people first, really does make a massively impactful difference on the success of your tool.
Yeah. To your point, if you don't have them, or someone has that sort of business analyst kind of approach and just is thinking more strategically versus tactically, just fixing that one thing, that can lead to a lot of frustration. The technologist has been asked to fix something and they go, oh, sure, yeah, I can fix that. And they fix it. And then 3 months later, it's like, oh, that thing that you did for us 3 months ago, it did this, 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 and this. It's like, well, yeah, but you didn't ask me to do any of the other stuff. You just asked me to. Part of this sort of total cost of ownership of a CRM is way beyond the technology subscription because of things like that. So, for example, in the HubSpot ecosystem, HubSpot does a report through IDC. I think it's every year now, where they talk about the total value of the ecosystem, because HubSpot knows that for every dollar invested in a CRM, there is $6 that are invested in making the CRM work, to your earlier point, for each unique company, because each unique company is unique and somebody somehow needs to customize the software from off the shelf to make it work for that unique business. And I think that seems to be, so the question, I guess, to you you started talking about mindset. What do you think is that mindset shift that either has happened or happens while you're having a conversation with a business owner or leader, where they suddenly go, oh, right, so the cost of the CRM is actually not just the software, it's I need to make sure that I have people, so internal or external, with the expertise who know how to think about this strategically and tactically, but in that order, first strategically and then tactically, so that if you're making any changes tactically, that they don't have some strategic downside, I guess.
Yeah, I would say historically, I found that it was generally when someone was 6 months in, right? They get 6 months into their system and then go, oh, there's more to this than just the raw cost of it. What we do now to prevent that 6 month in, talking to your earlier point about what are those mistakes made that we've learned from, that we've been able to grow from. That's one of them, is so very right in the early conversations, because we are talking about your business growth, because I'm a chief revenue officer. I look at it from that perspective. So every conversation we have is from that perspective as the organization's overall strategy and what are we looking at. So right off the bat, those conversations are coming up. I'm already talking about phase 6 when we're in phase 0, right? When we're just in pre-planning, we're talking about those future steps so that everyone's thinking about the down the line. Like this is an ongoing multi-year. Now, I don't say that to intimidate people, right? People think, oh my gosh, 3 years to implement my CRM. This is crazy. Well, no, the goal is you're up and running quickly. You've got a tool that you can use in the moment very quickly, but you don't want to stop there because you're going to stunt your growth. Just like you're not just going to hire a person and then walk away and cool, I hired somebody. My business must automatically improve now, right? You're going to continue to grow and develop that person you've hired. You're going to continue to add new widgets and service offerings to your operational side. It's the same thing with your CRM. As you continue to grow that business, your CRM continues to follow up. And so we're having all of those conversations from day one so that there is no aha moment because it's right off the bat, right? It's just so key to understand and always be forward looking in your business. That's why I love solopreneurs and micropreneurs, right? Because they oftentimes have that little short sighted, I need this in the moment view. And when you can get them to just think like a little bit more to the future, well, no, I'm not there yet. It's just me right now. Yes. But what if it wasn't just you? What if tomorrow you could have 3 people supporting you? How transformational is that for your business? Let's get you there now, right? Let's get you there faster with the technology.
Right. So you just alluded to something else now, which I guess I didn't mention earlier. So in what percentage of your engagements are you're actually coming in as the fractional CRO, CMO, CSO? What percentage of your engagements start there, and then the CRM is kind of a next step?
Sure. So obviously, as a CRO, there's only a handful of clients I really take on at any point in time. Where from the CRM side, we're taking on dozens and more at any point in time, right? As a full team to be able to do it. Every client what I go into as a fractional CRO or any organization that's using virtual or fractional support has to have good technology in place. And so if that's not there, that's obviously a key component of what I'm trying to put in. One of the great things that I love is I work with a lot of other fractional CROs and CSOs, and we partner together really well because a lot of times, if I'm going to be deep down in the weeds of your technology, I'm going to be thinking about it from a CRO perspective, but I'm not necessarily doing both in tandem. So a CRO will bring me in for me to go and do the CRM implementation for them because we think the same, right? We're coming at it from that same perspective, that same CRO outlook. And so it works really well. Other times, if I have been working with somebody and I'm in on their CRM and I'm there as their technologist, I will bring in another CRO to work that project as a CRO, somebody that I know that we're going to mesh well together. It's going to be great, but they're going to be looking at the big picture. And when I'm deep down in those technology weeds, I don't like to muddy the waters. I just don't think that it does anybody justice. However, I'll bring my CRO brain. I can't turn it off. It's always there. It will come into every single conversation I have as that technologist with my clients. So we are having CRM discussions. I'm always thinking about it as a CRO to make sure that we're taking all these elements into account. We're looking at the big picture and strategy. So I guess it's the upside. People say I'm certainly not the lowest cost person that you'll find out there, but it's because you're getting a CRO and a CRM strategist all rolled up in one.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that probably will help clarify this for not only for me, but for a lot of the folks listening, where kind of back to where we started today, which was it's people, process, and technology, because that's exactly how a CRO, whether it's fractional or a full-time CRO, has to think, right? It's like, I need to lead and coach and my team. I need to make sure that they have the processes so that every week and maybe daily, in certain cases with daily activities, everybody knows what they need to be doing and what success looks like every week. And then the coaching part of that, which again is the people and the process, the combination of the two, what's working, what's not, where do you need help, then you bring in the technology to make all that just better, faster, and more scalable. That makes a lot of sense. So, and maybe answers a lot for folks who've been listening as we were talking about, don't start with the technology, but the CRO in that situation is typically saying, yeah, well, absolutely, it's people, process, and then technology. And the data component, of course, will come in somewhere. Well, I guess on the data piece, so because you've mentioned a few times already analytics and reporting and whatever. Where does that, and sort of, let's bring this back to your sort of CRO perspective. Where does data fit into your people, process, technology framework?
Yeah, so it's so funny because most people will think, oh yeah, our data is pretty good. It's not that bad. And the second you try to merge it all together, you realize how much of a jumbled mess it is. Data can be a pretty big undertaking when you're looking at it. And so we look at data from day one. The first conversation that I have with someone when we start looking at it, I say, show me all your spreadsheets. Show me what you've currently got. If you've got a wall of Post-it notes, take a picture of it. If you've got a whiteboard, you put it all on, take a picture and send it to me, because I want to see. The key thing is not what's each little element of that data, but how is your brain currently processing data? And that's what I can gather by looking at how you've organized your spreadsheet, by how you're adding your notes and how you've got your whiteboards written out. When I understand how you organize and work data, that's when I can start to make sure that I'm putting the best structure to a CRM in place, really customizing the views and the layouts and everything. The elements of, okay, well, which fields should be multi-select versus single select? That's really, like, it seems so small and trivial, but it has a huge impact on reporting. I had somebody who was like, I want this to be multi-select field. It really should be a multi-select field. Well, then they start getting responses in and people are doing multi-select. Well, they go to run their report, and instead of 6 options on their report in columns, they've got 17 options because person picked option A and C. Well, that became its own line item on a report because now it's not just option A, option C. It's the combination of A plus C. And so it can really skew your data when you're trying to look at big pictures. And so it's the conversations that we have around that are, again, that reporting for reporting's sake versus what are you going to do with it? Great. I'm going to put this information in. What do you plan on doing with the data from that field once you start seeing it in the system and can manipulate it? Tell me what conversations you're going to have in your pipeline meeting. What conversations is your C-suite going to have when they sit there in their quarterly strategy sessions? Once I understand that, that's how we know how we should manipulate the data and put it in the system, right? Really understanding again, it's the why, not the what, not the how. It comes back to that why. Why do you want this in the first place? And then we can understand how we're going to actually build it into the system.
Yeah. I think that's super helpful. I remember exactly what you're talking about, but now we're working with much bigger companies, and the data component is so critical because you gave the example earlier when you were speaking to a business owner and you're asking them, well, at some point, are you going to start doing marketing? Of course, in our case, we're working with companies where they absolutely are doing marketing because they have to, otherwise they'll die. So we need to know from the very beginning, like, what metrics is marketing responsible for, and what does that handoff look like? How many marketing qualified leads do they need to be generating in their SLA with sales? And then the same thing, you dive into the sales data, and then what the sales need to do to hand off to customer service, etc. So for us, I guess because of the complexity, because you're working with multiple teams on so it's the revenue team is marketing, sales, and service. I can now see that. I remember working with single business owners where it was all just one set of data because they didn't differentiate between marketing and sales. It was all just sales. That brings back some good memories.
Yeah. I mean, it's great, right? It's that cross-departmental element that's so vital to come into play. You think, oh, CRM, that's for my sales department. Great. Salespeople, you go run with this and figure it out. Well, don't you talk to your marketing department? Don't you interact with operations? You guys have to have some sort of overlap. And so shouldn't your technology as well? And so it's helping people get that support. And sometimes, operations already has their own tool and that they're going to be using. And we figure out a way to integrate with that and work. And other times, operations also using spreadsheets. So let's try to find a CRM solution that's even more of an ERP. It can cross finance and operations and sales, or at least do marketing sales to operations and get those elements together. And so that's when we start to get into a lot of the fun and exciting parts of like, okay, what tool are we going to pick now, right? Because we're not just looking for sales and we're not just looking sales and marketing. We're really looking full organization wide that's going to have the elements that's going to make everyone happy. And those are when we talk about those 3-year implementations and where there's just a lot going on because you don't necessarily want to take the rug out from underneath your entire organization all at once, right? And so it's why it's so, so important to build out a really well formulated roadmap on how you're going to make a change that's significant like that.
Yeah. Yeah. As businesses grow, the negative impacts of silos you gave the example, misalignment between marketing and sales, that becomes a real issue. And businesses will not grow until they figure that out, which of course is why we talk a lot about RevOps. And of course, the name of the show is RevOps Champions, because what RevOps does and why we lean into it so heavily as a layer above the technology piece on the CRM is that it's aligning the people, the processes, the data, and the technology cross-functionally. You just said it perfectly, from marketing all the way to ops, that you have to have aligned systems if you want to grow.
Absolutely.
And which is ultimately what we're talking about all the time is like, what are your obstacles to growth and how do you fix them? And then those become massive opportunities for growth. So I'm sure you do too, find that data and technology can be assets or liabilities. So how do you manage these areas for your clients to keep the data and technology being, you've already touched on this a few times, but your data and your technology being an asset versus a liability?
Yeah, this is so valuable. I'm glad you bring this up. So, because it really does happen. It slips so quickly. So we put little triggers, little reminders, different areas within the CRM. And depending on which one you use, which tool you decide on, there's different ways to go about this. Sometimes it's a matter of tasks. Sometimes we'll build a report that automatically emails to your inbox. So it's not pull, right? Pushing of the data that you want to have, pushing of information that you want somebody to take action on is the best way. If you just put it on a dashboard and expect people to go look at it, it's probably not going to happen, at least not in the beginning. So what we'll do is we'll create a report that maybe it's a close dates in the past, right? How often do we look at a pipeline and you see all of these close dates that were 2 weeks, 3 months ago, right? A year and a half. Like, why are they still sitting here in your active pipeline when that close date is obviously long gone? So we'll put a report on that. Other things we'll do is very quick glimpse, easy ways to be able to see any opportunities that don't have a next step. That's one of the easiest things you can do to avoid dropping the ball and missing out on an opportunity is every opportunity has to have a next step, right? So let's figure out the best ways within the system, whether it's in Zoho, there's filters that you can put in place. And if you put a filter in your deals module, you'll see a little number next to it and it'll tell you like, oh, 7 deals are missing an opportunity because that's what you filtered for, or missing an activity because that's what you filtered for. So the second you open up your deals pipeline, you see, oops, I've got to work on 7 deals right now. Things like that, right? In HubSpot, the analytics that come right out of the box with it are amazingly robust. Looking at those and leveraging that information to see where we look for trends on where we might be dropping the ball in certain areas. It's so valuable, but it comes back to people. People are the ones that manage the data at the end of the day. So how do we make it as simple as possible for the people to keep the data integrity up? And that's really the focus. Don't ask me to fill out 50 fields if you're only going to use 13 of them for reporting purposes. Only ask me to fill out the 13 that I need to, right? Because then you have a much better chance of me doing it. You'll also see in these CRM systems, one of the biggest things is this linear scroll, right? I'm going to scroll to find the data that I want, or click 17 times to find it. What we like to do is reconfigure the layout of your system. Let's move all the junk fields that you really don't care about to the background. Let's keep the important stuff above the fold so that you don't have to scroll above the fold, the old newspaper term, or above the scroll in this case, right? Let's keep it right there. So as soon as I open up that record page, I can see the information that I need to work with. I can also see the information I need to fill in. And I'm not having to go and hunt for that one particular field that my boss told me, hey, don't forget to fill this in for my report.
Yeah, which of course is not a surprise, but interesting how, as you were explaining that, it was, you said it starts with the people. And really what you were explaining was a process for those people to do certain things at certain times to make sure that their data and their technology remain assets and don't become a liability, which I loved how that all came together. Kristen, we're going to wrap up here with one last question. So with some of your bigger clients, which probably coincide with some of our clients as well, who might be listening, what advice would you give them right now as they think about how to think about the investment in their CRM for the next 3 years?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. The best thing that I think about is when you're thinking about investing in another person in your organization, right? What is that thought process that you go through? You think about how they're going to alleviate pain points, how they're going to make things better. Think about that CRM, just like we tell people, think about AI like it's a person, talk to it like it's a person on your team. Think about your CRM that same way. It is a really valuable asset. It's like another employee that you've brought into the company and the organization. How do you want that employee to grow in their career over the years, right? How do you want your CRM to grow with you over the years? And really thinking about that, not just as this extra piece of software, right? When we think about a CRM as a piece of software, we think about it as a cost center and we think about it as an extra headache that we have to manage. If we think about that CRM as another member of our team, it becomes a valuable asset that we are going to foster its growth. We are going to really work with it. We're going to make sure it becomes a valued member of the team. And I really like people to think about it that way so that it takes out that burden and that expense and this headache that comes around with it. And it really gets people thinking in the mindset of this is a true valued asset to our organization.
That's really good advice. I love that. And it reminds me about, it's a long time ago now, but when websites were a big deal, and they're obviously still important, although it's kind of tricky to figure out where websites are going now. One of the things that was a big message that we always talked about was your website could become your best salesperson, right? So I like the way you talk about for business leaders to see their CRM as a human. In other words, like, how do we nurture and grow this? As long as they're going to be with us, let's make sure that they're doing better and bigger things every quarter. So love that analogy. Well, Kristen, thanks again so much for being on the show. I look forward to chatting again soon. And we'll obviously share some relevant links to all your stuff in the show notes when the episode comes out in a few weeks.
Excellent. Thanks so much. This was really fun. And I love working with you, Brendon. It's great to talk to you. And it's great to I always get inspired and more ideas every time we have a conversation. So this is fantastic.
Likewise. Yeah. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks for listening to RevOps Champions. If today's episode gave you a new idea for scaling smarter or helped you see your team, processes, or tech in a new light, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next insight. And if it hit home, share it with a colleague. Let's grow this community for forward-thinking leaders together.